Some roads are scribbled onto a map and engineered to move goods, but M-22 seems whispered into existence by the land itself. It's what Michigan calls a trunk line, an idea we pinched from the Brits over a century ago. The highway is named for the trunk of a tree with branching roads reaching into the land. Back when Model Ts rattled along rutted wagon trails and horse droppings outnumbered tire tracks, states like Michigan had to figure out how to stitch together farms, forests, and factories. So they laid down tar and gravel, gave it a number, and called it a trunk line highway, the veins and arteries of an automotive nation just learning how to drive. M-22 is one of the first and easily one of the most stubbornly scenic. It coils for 116 miles along the Leland Peninsula and down Benzie County, hugging the Mitten's pinky finger. It's a place where time slows down just enough for you to remember how to breathe. Empire, once a lumber boomtown, is now a gateway to the dunes that swallow the horizon whole. Glen Arbor feels like it was handcrafted by a folk singer with a sweet tooth for cherry pie. And then there's Fishtown, a row of cedar-planked fish shacks leaning into each other like old fishermen swapping stories. Across the region are row after row of tart cherries, a fruit that would define this region long before craft beer and art galleries. And long before those cherry trees, the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires, hunted, fished, and told stories that the dunes and the lakes still remember better than we do. Some roads force you to watch the clock. This one dares you to ignore it.
And we start here at this unassuming but lively traffic circle at the intersection of US 31 and M22. Where it starts. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins. The channel is Restless Vikings.
Let's roll our windows down, smell the lake air, and we'll keep an eye out because this road's got stories to tell.
I know a place where we can go and be alone. So come away with me, nobody has to know where we gonna go.
So our first stop is Onka and Portage Lake, and there's a pretty good story here. Portage Lake got its start by a few fur traders that stopped here, and then eventually a few adventurous lumbermen decided that this would be a nice spot to put some mills. And in fact, right over that way used to be the outlet to Lake Michigan where they built a mill and they dammed it up. Well, as the lumber around Portage Lake was cleared, settlers moved in and cleared it completely and then planted their crops in it. But every year Portage Lake would flood and flood their crops. And so they appealed to the courts to get that to stop so that they wouldn't be ruining their crops. And the courts didn't really listen and it was taking too much time. So the settlers took the matter into their own hands. And they found the shortest path across the land from Portage Lake to Lake Michigan. And they started digging a canal about 4 feet wide. And to their surprise, the water quickly carved out a 400-foot wide channel from Portage Lake out to Lake Michigan. And it turns out the leveling of Portage Lake and Lake Michigan made a really nice harbor for boats and ships to come into. And by 1879, the lumber had been depleted on the coast, so they moved way up Portage Lake to a more desirable location for the mills, and that started the village of Onka.
So not far off of M-22 are these artesian wells. You can see the water bubbling up from underneath. In the 1880s, people flocked here by rail and by steamship to come experience these waters. Now, of course, some people capitalized on this and quoted authorities in the newspaper. Dr. R.T. Mead was quoted in the Manistee News as saying, "These waters have remedial and curative properties of a high order," claiming that this water would be helpful for rheumatism and neuralgia and many other things. They sold it and made money. That is fresh, clean, clear water bubbling up. Now there's quite a hill to climb.
So as Poppins mentioned, throughout this whole area are artesian wells and artesian springs. So the way an artesian well works is it's kind of like an underground balloon that has a lot of weight on it, so it's really, really under a lot of pressure. And if you take a straw and you poke it through the ground into that balloon, it's going to come bubbling up. And it's going to do that for a long time, depending on the pressure in that aquifer, as long as decades, hundreds of years, and even millennia. And in the case of this artesian well called Old Faithful, it's been bubbling here since 1931.
Oh yeah, I live around this. There's a scared wildlife down here.
So the way artesian... And what's really surprising is we thought it was a tourist stop, but we've been here maybe 15 minutes and 7 locals have stopped by to fill up jugs. A guy came by with a glass. He lives down the road, came by with a glass just to get a glass of water. That's pretty impressive.
Oh my gosh, it's good.
Spring water. That would normally cost you like $3 for a bottle in a gas station. You can get it here for free. So right along M-22, which is right over there, it's a little causeway that you'll come across. You come to Arcadia Marsh, which is a 320-acre restored habitat to be one of the few remaining Great Lakes coastal marshes. It's home to like 252 species of birds, 17 of them which are endangered. It's got 201 species of plant, including a threatened species of wild rice, and about 28 species of fish that reside here in the restored wetlands. And it has quite an extensive boardwalk that goes right down the center of the preserve.
What an amazing place.
So one of the must-see overlooks, and if you can only see one overlook, this would probably be it, is Inspiration Point. And we're not there yet, but just here at the parking area is an amazing view of Lake Michigan. And I believe, with the exception of maybe a skyscraper in Chicago, this is the highest point along the Lake Michigan shoreline for viewing.
The Point Bessie Lighthouse is the oldest structure in Benzie County. It was built in 1858. It's positioned here at the south end of the Manitou Straits.
So in the 1800s, Martha Wheaton emigrated from Norway to Michigan and married Andrew Wheaton, who was a lumberjack. And they lived in the Upper Peninsula, but Andrew died early, and she brought her 6 children to Sheboygan and raised them. One of her sons, Edward Wheaton, was a lighthouse keeper here from 1934 to 1946. When she passed away in 1941, he made a gravestone to honor his mother and to bring to Sheboygan to mark her grave. But he couldn't lift the gravestone up into his car to bring it to Sheboygan, so it's still here.
For most, the prominent feature of M-22 is Sleeping Bear Dunes, but those dunes haven't slept in millennia. The Ojibwa tell of a mother bear who swam across Lake Michigan with her cubs, fleeing a great fire. The cubs drowned, and where they sank rose the Manitou Islands. The mother waited on shore, and the sand slowly covered her grief, forming the massive dune we see today. But legends aside, this place is a geographic freak show. Imagine winds so strong they sculpt mountains out of sand. Glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago, leaving behind this 450-foot wall of sand rising above Lake Michigan, daring your legs and lungs to race down and crawl back up. And while tourists climb, slide, and post selfies, nature is doing quiet work. Piping plovers nestled in dunes, sugar maples, and beech trees holding their ground, and old Coast Guard stations reminding us that even paradise needed saving when storms turned it deadly.
So the story of D.H. Day starts with a guy named Philo Chamberlain. He was the president of the Northern Transportation Company. He was a lumberman with 24 ships. So Chamberlain saw potential in his sister-in-law's younger brother, David Henry Day, D.H. Day. And he hired D.H. Day to be the dock master. So D.H. Day saw opportunities to make money. He paid his dock hands 35 cents an hour, and he paid his lumberjacks 15 cents an hour. But these were paid by coupons that were only good to be spent at his company store. Now, D.H. Day lived above the store with his wife, and they had 9 children over 20 years. By 1910, D.H. Day owned most of Glen Haven.
So also in Glen Haven is the Sleeping Bear Inn, which has a long history and has been refurbished, I believe, and you can stay there now. Down the road's a blacksmith shop that you can see demonstrations of a blacksmith doing work. We have the Glen Haven Canning Company with quite a long history of canning fruits, and out there used to be a really long dock, and you can still see the pilings out there for the dock that is just below the surface. It's a dock that had steamers show up, and they used to load cordwood on it for the steamers and canned goods from the cannery. Glen Haven's a really cool little stop. It's kind of like a little town that was dropped off the back of a pickup truck and forgotten about. So just down the road, just a piece from Glen Haven, is the Sleeping Bear Point Life-Saving Station, which used to be at Sleeping Bear Point, but now it's here, and that's an interesting story. And this little life-saving station has meaning to me personally, because as we were kayaking back in some pretty bad weather from North Manitou Island, we used the white buildings of the life-saving station as a landmark to know where we needed to paddle to get home safely. And I guess that's kind of the point of the big white buildings of a life-saving station, is so they're visible. If you look straight out there, you can see North Manitou Island way off in the distance, kind of shrouded by haze. There were 3 ways that the Sleeping Bear Point life-saving station could rescue those out there that were in trouble, and the Manitou Straits are probably some of the most dangerous straits on Lake Michigan. And what they would do is, in this boathouse, they would usually have a 23-footer and a 26-footer, and the 23-footer could hold 8 to 10 passengers, and the 26-footer could hold more, and I'm not quite sure how many that was, but they would launch the boat from the boathouse straight out into the surf, and then they would go out and they could rescue them. Another way was by using a cannon. I think it's called a Lindell cannon or a Lindell cannon, where they would fire a rescue line out at the ship and kind of go over the ship, and then at the ship they would secure that rescue line, and then they would bring people back in a car from the shipwreck to the shore. And they preferred the cannon over going out into the surf. Now, if you notice, the sand dunes have risen up in front of the rails that they could launch the boats from. When they were out at Sleeping Bear Point, about, I don't know, a few hundred yards that way, it was hard to launch the boats because they were exposed to the full fury of Lake Michigan. And as the sand started to swallow the station, I believe somewhere around the 20s or 30s, they decided to move it down here. So they hooked up some horses, they put the buildings on rollers, and they rolled the whole life-saving station to where it is today. So if you get a chance, Glen Haven and the life-saving station is a great stop along M-22. It's a little ways off though. So M-22 is quite a popular road. And get this, it's so popular, the road signs for M-22 disappear so quickly you'd think that they're walking off on your own. In fact, the state of Michigan says that they spend $10,000 annually to replace these signs. So local crews have actually started using theft-resistant bolts. They've been putting the signs on higher poles, and they've even removed the M from the M-22 sign to discourage people from stealing them. And it seems to be working. And there's even more to the saga story of the M-22 sign. In 2004, local brothers Kean and Matt Myers launched M-22 LLC. And they actually went through the trouble to trademark the M-22 sign, even though it's in public domain. And that was to protect their commercial interest in printing the sign on stickers and on clothing and the wine that they make. And the state of Michigan even fought this for a few years, but eventually, as the new attorney general took over, the state decided that, whatever, and they backed off. And today, the road marker sign is more than just a road sign. It's a unofficial badge of honor saying that, yeah, I've been there. I've done cool tourist stuff on that highway.
So 150 years ago, this was a place to gather, the mill. Farmers came and brought their wheat and their corn to be made into flour and cornmeal. So the Bremer family ran this mill until 1945, and then it fell into some disrepair. In the 1970s, it was a recording studio for a short time. And then in 1986, it became a storage facility. Then in 2018, the Fernhouse Studio bought this place and renovated it. And as a nod to the Bremer family who ran the mill till 1945, they've kept a whole bunch of the artifacts and things. I can't wait to go see it. Come on.
If you walk through the historic Fishtown in Leland, you'll notice two things. The thick, heavy smell of fresh caught whitefish, and you'll notice some leaning shanties. It started back in the 1850s when European settlers saw the opportunity swimming right at the docks out on Lake Michigan for fishing industry. And for decades, fishing wasn't just an industry here, it became a way of life. And from 1910 to about 1940, along the banks of this river, these fishing shanties started sprouting up.
By the 1950s, the sea lamprey had destroyed the fish industry here. Fisheries began closing, nets were being hung up, and this whole town almost became a postcard memory.
But then the Carlson family came along, and they were going to hang up their nets. They were going to get creative, and they were going to start smoking whitefish, creating fish sausage, and they opened their doors to visitors to show them how the fishery's done. And they rented out some of these shanties to local businesses, mixing fish with fudge and smoked sausage with souvenirs. But still, times were tough. Quotas were tightened, regulations were tightened, and even the Carlsons wondered if the fishery would survive. So they started the Fishtown Preservation Society. They raised money and they bought shanties with the intent of preserving history. And today, thanks to the Carlson family and some dedicated supporters, Fishtown isn't a memory, it's thriving. And the Joy and the Janice Sue still cast nets out onto Lake Michigan, operated by the Fishtown Preservation Society. The shanties have an eclectic mix of ice cream and souvenirs, and even the 5th generation of the Carlson family. And a fleet of charter boats are taking fishermen out every day to introduce them to the lake's bounty, and you can catch a ride to the Manitou Islands from the Manitou Island Ferry. It's not just preservation here, it's living history.
Have you heard of the Leland blue stones that they used to make into jewelry? For 15 years, starting in 1870, these little blue pieces of rock actually were the garbage, the leftovers from an iron smelting processor right here on the shoreline. People right now are over there looking for Leland blue stones. So to get iron, they had to heat the rock and separate the impurities, which would latch on to limestone. Now these limestone pieces would cool, and some of them were turning blue. And those are the Leland blue stones that are so sought after today.
We're a little ways north of M-22, and as a pilot and a veteran, I appreciate the story of this place. It was around 1858 when Chauncey and Caroline Woolsey came from Buffalo, New York, and established a farm here, and eventually their son made it into a successful dairy farm. And fast forward to the grandson, I believe, of Chauncey was a Clinton Woolsey, who was a pilot, and he was a pilot so early in the aviation industry that his pilot's license was actually signed, I believe, by Wilbur Wright. And in 1926, Captain Clinton Woolsey was an engineer in the U.S. Army Air Service, and he was one of 10 pilots selected for the Pan American Goodwill flight, which took place in South and Central America. And during that flight, they were having some mechanical trouble with the aircraft, and Clinton stayed with the airplane until his partner could bail out. And it was too late for him to bail out, so the plane crashed. In February of 1929, Clinton Woolsey died in that plane crash. His body was brought back, and the funeral happened in Northport. And his father dedicated this 80 acres and what's believed to be the Dairy Farm Creamery for an airport in memory of his son. And the Civil Works Administration dedicated workers in 1933 and 34 to build this airfield, and the creamery became the terminal. And finally, on July 14th of 1935, it was all dedicated as Woolsey Memorial Airport.
So now we're in Northport, and since 2008, the community has really gathered around being a green community. They installed wind turbines for their water treatment plant, and they even have a special filtration system built right in to keep any pollutants from going out into the harbor.
Back in the 1920s, when lake trout fishing was all nets and sweat, a Traverse City native named George Roff came up with an idea of trolling for those lake trout with a rod and a reel in the calm waters of Grand Traverse Bay. But the fun was kind of short-lived, because by the 1940s, overfishing and the sea lamprey put a dent in the lake trout. But then in the 1960s, the state of Michigan started planting coho and chinook, and the old rod and reel tricks started to come back. And that's when homemade lures made from tin cans and bicycle spokes started to make salmon chasers across all of the Great Lakes. And George and his wife Nell, well, they provided charter fishing through all of this, $1 an hour and a handshake promise that, yeah, you'll catch something. And this is where Great Lakes sport fishing apparently was born. And today, coupled with the smartphone, not only is charter fishing big business, but you also are going to meet someone in a bar that's going to show you pictures from their phone, no matter what.
A lot of pictures. Chief Agosta lived here in 1852 with 40 families. Now, at that time, the government was relocating Anishinaabe people out west. Reverend Dowdery started this mission church, a Presbyterian church, and he really respected the chief and the 40 families. Reverend Dowdery would listen with respect to the chief and the 40 families and would say, Omana, Omana, which means, is that so? Is that so? And from that saying, from that native language, we've got the settlement of Omina today. Most of the natives stayed in the region and moved just south of here at Shabbytown. We're in Sutton's Bay, Michigan now. In 1854, Harry C. Sutton saw this great bay as a perfect place to build a long dock for ships to come and be loaded with cordwood for their steam engines. So Harry and his crew chopped wood and helped load steamers. He named this settlement Suttonsburg. Lars Bales opened the dry goods store here in Sutton's Bay in 1876, and it's still open today. It's in the 5th generation of owners.
Well, it's happened again. You've squandered another 20 minutes or so as we've chased M-22 through windswept dunes and fish shanties to orchards, hidden beaches, and the stories that are tucked in between mile markers. And now, here we are back at the end of M-22, where the trunk line feeds into the city lights of Traverse City. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
Thanks for rolling down the windows and smelling the lake breeze and taking a wander down M-22, one of Michigan's most scenic highways.